Met our superstar yesterday. This is Nathan from Detroit Labs, CEO and co-founder, correct?
Co-founder, I think that's the only title I use. Paul Glomsky is the CEO, and then there's two other co-founders, and
Gotcha.
we both go by co-founder.
Excellent. All right. So my students enjoyed very much getting your insights yesterday, or from yesterday today, and they've come up with some questions. We had actually made it through a good chunk of the things we were hoping to talk about yesterday. Before I had a little technology glitch, and I'll confess to you that I told my students that it was really my fault, and it was. Yeah,
Google Hangouts is not the easiest thing. Let's be honest.
Exactly. Well, and I think they enjoyed the fact that it was candidly, I was messing around. I was trying to make sure you could see me as well, and in the process of doing that, I disabled my audio, so that's how we lost connection yesterday. All right, so let's go ahead and pick up, I think our last remaining topic from yesterday, and aside from what students have come up now with some ideas, was what are some technologies that students should be aware of, some things that are newer or things that they should really be up to speed on going forward for an IT career?
So, I mean, talking about general technologies, and working in teams, working in companies that are doing work with more than one developer, say. Distributed version control systems. So you need to understand why those exist and why they're important and how to use them. So GitHub is the most popular right now. It became very popular because it allowed easy sharing of open source code or projects. It became a very social code sharing site. So expertise with Git and how that works, and expertise with GitHub and how to post and do pull requests and grab projects and contribute to projects, and that is very important. Or any other, there's a lot of other version control systems out there, obviously, but that's one technology that, frankly, in an interview, if someone doesn't see it or doesn't know how or has never worked with that, that's almost a bigger warning flag sometimes to us than, hey, you don't know how to program an Android. It's because that is an underpinning of so many other kinds of projects and jobs and things like that, that if you never worked with it at all, sort of like, oh, wait a minute, what's going on? Programmers should know how to use a terminal in whatever kind of program coding environment they use. So if you're on a Linux box or you're on OS X, if you're on Windows, which isn't something that we use here, but being able to use a terminal command line and be proficient in that to almost be, I would say, at the novice system administrator level. And you want that and need that because you're going to be installing a lot of packages or libraries or systems or maybe a database that you want to use locally. You're also going to be doing a lot of dependency management. And a lot of those things you have to drop in the terminal and you have to figure out what's going on, what's wrong, how those things work. You need to have a good understanding of testing and packages that support testing. And both, I would look as a programmer, you want to know and be very familiar with unit testing and sort of the XUnit style of writing unit tests, as well as maybe not proficiency, but at least an understanding and that they exist of the behavioral kinds of automated test suites. Something like Cucumber, Jasmine, things that both test from a user standpoint. Here's how I'm interacting with these and doing these transactions with my application. And I want to fake that, as well as at the code level. Other technology, and then obviously whatever you're trying to build or develop in, you have to have that kind of technical start. If you didn't have any technology or programming language under your belt and you were just starting, I would look for one that's very social and has a great community. So if you're talking about server kind of programming or things on that get deployed, and I would look at Ruby or Python because those both have really good communities, and they're sort of fun to program in. Both of them are very fun programming languages. And then obviously you can't go wrong with JavaScript right now. JavaScript, and I'm not talking about the browser sort of level of JavaScript. There's so much programming going on with JavaScript that it is a great language to learn. Not necessarily my first pick for your first language, to try, because it is sort of a strange language in and of its, with its the way it's structured, the way it types, and the way it's object oriented and things like that. That might not be a great learner, but lots of people learn how to program using that.
Okay, great. Well, it's interesting.
Matter of things.
We hadn't even mentioned this before, so it's kind of funny that for my year one students, we actually do start right with JavaScript because a lot of them haven't any experience with things like variables or arrays or loops. So we use some online sites to be able to help them get started, and then they build some of their own little mini games. JavaScript.
JavaScript's great because it has such immediate response. You can see immediate feedback in a browser. And one of the things that you want when you're learning how to program is something that makes it really easy for you to see the results. Something like mobile development is not at all a good language or a good environment to learn how to program in because it takes a lot to see the results. Something like JavaScript, even JavaScript, you can, in the command line, like your Google Chrome command line, you can write JavaScript and see immediate results. If you have an OS X box, Python and Ruby are both installed, and there's interactive interpreters that you can drop into and run commands. And that's really helpful when you are starting out and you just want to try and run commands and see the results and work through that process.
Awesome. Okay. Well, you mentioned OS X boxes. I know a lot of my students are primarily PC folks, and they're surprised sometimes when we've started having more Macs in our classroom. And for iOS development, obviously, you need to use a Mac. But I think maybe a lot of them aren't aware of the fact that, as you just mentioned, that you've got some built-in tools, and you can get to a command line right there to be able to do some things too. So maybe on a tangent, I'm not sure if this is something you've come across or if you think it's a tool for students to know about. But we've discovered this thing called the Raspberry Pi. It's a little UK or a box out of the UK.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on students getting some experience messing around with those kind of things?
So hardware hacking is just a wonderful kind of activity to get into. In terms of learning, obviously you're going to have to dive into and learn a lot of logic and things like that. I wouldn't say there is a strong correlation between being a hardware hacker and being a software programmer, other than a lot of times programmers love to be a hardware hacker and hardware hackers love to be a programmer. Because there's an overlap in the building, I think, mentality. This is a thing that I can create and build actual physical things in the world, and that's a lot of fun. And when you're a software developer by career, and that's what you do for 10, 15, 20 years, one of the things you will miss out on is the physical world and building something that exists in the physical world. Mobile development is really fun right now because you can put something on a phone, and it's sort of physical like that. Hardware hacking scratches that itch, I think, for a lot of people as well. We've got a hardware hacking lab here. We've got a 3D printer. We've got a robot that's under development. I mean, we do those things because there's a lot of great, just fun activities that you can do. Raspberry Pi. What happens with a Raspberry Pi is it also expands. I mean, you can program. So obviously, you're programming and putting things on it. It expands. We were talking about constraints yesterday. Expands again on this sort of what are the constraints around my system and what will it allow me or not allow me to do. And you have just all of a sudden removed the constraint of physical proximity or location. And a lot of times you remove the constraint of a network connection. If I can get a little power and I can think of a way to run an app or do something that's useful on a Raspberry Pi, you've removed another constraint. Beacons, which are really fun to play with, if you haven't gotten any in your lab, definitely do, removes another constraint, because now it's, here's these little tiny circuits or little tiny networks that I can attach to and do small transactions with. Now I don't need an internet connection, I need a Wi-Fi connection. I can attach to that, and there's a lot of really fun things you can do with that, and it allows location apps to be built, because the beacons will tell you where you are at a much more granular level than GPS. And so now, instead of the 10-meter resolution of a GPS signal, you might get half-a-foot resolution of a beacon signal, and you can distribute those in a location. Like in your classroom right there, you can put 5 beacons in each of the corners and maybe in the middle. And you can have an app that would know you're in the upper left versus the lower right, and it could do things. Oh, I'm in the upper left, I'm going to unlock this door. I'm in the lower right, I'm going to turn this light on. So again, it's a constraint that's removed because there's a new piece of technology, a new piece of hardware that exists.
Awesome. You know, as you're mentioning some of these things, it's kind of piggybacked into a project that I've kind of been mulling over for next year's class, is to use some of our equipment, like some Pis or some Arduinos or maybe some of the beacons too, to think about developing some interactive, real space games that we're actually doing some things with our gadgets to make them do things, but make a game out of it, and they kind of let the students set up the rules or their parameters of what's the game. What's the goal of this contest to do. So I'm glad you're saying that, because I had not heard of the Beacon for that kind of resolution, and that's fantastic.
Oh yeah, it does great location. And a lot of things, if I was doing that like in a school, I might take sort of one of those traditional games that you might have played, like the Assassin's game, where it's all cards and it's all, there's roles and people have it. I would change that around and use Raspberry Pis as sort of check-ins or dead drops, and maybe beacons to show that, if an assassin and the target is in the same area around the beacon, that registers a kill. I mean, you could do great things with that. The Raspberry Pi also, there's some proximity things. If you have a mobile app that knows about, or another physical device that you create, and you get close to and tag the Raspberry Pi in some ways, you could do some really magical looking effects, especially if that Raspberry Pi is hooked up to a TV, and you take a picture and you bump it against the Raspberry Pi, and all of a sudden the TV shows it. It looks like you've done something amazing. Right? So there's a lot of things that you can do that are really, really fun.
That's awesome. All those sound like great ideas. Well, thank you. That's inspiring. I know yesterday you had mentioned a little bit about some things as far as you guys do a little bit of training right there on the job kind of thing. That was a lot. One of the questions. Okay, gotcha. So there's a fair amount of that going on in your student.
In our in our company, yes, and it's different. That depends on the company. Some companies have structures like that. Some companies hire people that already are highly trained and highly skilled, and they should compensate, accordingly. We only hire 5-year, 10-year veterans of the field, and that's why it's only upper six-figure salaries that we start with and stuff like that. Some companies, I know. Some companies, they have very structured training programs where people might start and they go and they get training in training centers. Ours, it's you're working with people that are doing the work and are developers on projects. You're pairing with them and you're learning from them. I think it's very much a individual company I keep using this word, I hate it, but an individual company's culture that defines or decides how they're going to do the training. But I don't think any company can succeed unless they do have some kind of training plan. Or, they're a company that are excellent at some industry or some field, and they die when that industry goes away because they have no way to change and adapt.
Gotcha.
So I would look at, if I was a student looking at maybe an internship, or if I was a graduate looking at my first job, that's definitely something that I would be interviewing a company for. Because obviously we know that when you interview, the company's looking at you to see if they're going to hire you. You should be looking at that company to see if it fits. And if you have a desire or a need, or you want to learn and adapt and change and grow, or you have all these different areas that you want to grow into and explore, you have to choose a company that fits. That's all part of the decision making.
Oh, great advice. Excellent. Well, I know we're running shy on time. My last piece I'd just like to get your input on is if a student were coming to you, or a potential candidate, or you're thinking about visiting a high school and you're saying, what are students creating these days to be able to showcase their skills? To you, what would be the most important things for a student to have in whether it's a virtual or a physical portfolio? What kind of things would you be looking for as far as this would really impress me?
So things that would immediately, we'll take anything and whatever the student actually has put together, if they can present it, we'll look at that. But what'll give a student a leg up is if they can show, a public GitHub repository, say, that has 6 or 7 contributions to open source projects, or maybe their own projects that they've released, and they can just give me their GitHub user ID, and I can go take a look at that, and I can see a history of contribution, or SourceForge, or some other kind of thing. That is a huge deal. If they can give me maybe a site that they publish to blog, they blog or they publish other things to. They give me their Twitter ID, and I can look at that, and we're pretty, we ask for Twitter ID when we hire, and then I give them mine as well in that exchange, so that they can see that this isn't, my Twitter ID is full of garbage. So if theirs is full of garbage too, that's fine. But I can see interaction with the community, or I can see interaction with something that is important. So I'm looking for that. That is a really easy thing. Like, here, check out my GitHub public repositories. There's 10 things to look at. I've now answered, what kind of code style does this applicant have? What things are they interested in? What things have they chosen to get involved in that are just because they have an interest or a desire or a drive to contribute or participate in? The things that we choose to do that we're not getting paid for are incredibly important. And for a company like mine, where culture is about the most important thing and team fit is the most important thing, that's what we look at first. Other companies, if you come out, it's very difficult, obviously, I'm sure you're telling everyone this, it's very difficult to come out of either high school or college with a degree and that's it and compete and in any way get that first interview or get that resume even noticed. So if you don't have these other things, I'm looking for what have you done above and beyond. I would, and I don't want to say this too strongly, but I would maybe shy away from the college level events and try and find and pick up internships or apprenticeships or startup weekends or hackathon activity or things like that that show a little bit more of an individual making a decision to go do something and then spending all that energy to do it. If I know hackathons are actually really, really big in college right now, so it's possible they won't be big in a few years. Who knows? We'll see how that works.
Right.
But right now, you can develop a lot of experience in showable, demonstrable product delivery experience by participating in hackathons and sort of saving your project and the project pages and things like that. So those are the kinds of things I'm always looking for, are real world things that I can either I can look at or I can use or I can play with during a visit. When someone says, "Oh, I've been working on this really great thing," if they can show it to me, great. If they tell me they've been working on this really great mobile app and it's this and that or what does all this and they can't show it to me, I immediately I just wonder like what's going on. So I want to see that stuff as well. And it doesn't have to be the highest quality. Like that's a hard thing to get over. A lot of times you're like, oh, I'm in an interview, I have to show something that is amazing or polished or refined or looks like something in the App Store. Completely false. You never have to do that. If it's a side project or whatever, the fact that you've done something is so much more impressive than most of your peers who haven't done anything like that. We got a guy that came in for an apprenticeship last summer, and he had built a game on his phone, and we thought, oh, this is great. The game was, I can't remember who it was. Let's say it was Justin Bieber. It wasn't Justin Bieber, but it was Justin Bieber heads floating around, and he put on like a from like an old video game, helicopter video game.
Okay.
The graphic, and you shot the heads, and they made explosions. This was nothing that you'd ever show in the App Store, but it was super impressive, and we hired him. Yeah, come in for the summer because obviously you're doing stuff. The last thing that I look for and I love to see is presentations or even membership and contribution to user groups or some kind of community involvement. So if you go to a mobile meetup, you're an iOS, you want to be an iOS developer, and you go to Cocoa Heads, or you do some things and you've presented in some ways, that is wonderful. Because communication and the ability to interact with team members is a really important thing, maybe the most important thing, and it's the hardest thing to figure out in an interview situation. So when you provide options and opportunities for employers to see that you can do those things, and here they actually, there's a history of that. A lot of employers will breathe a sigh of relief and hire you because they know that they've got someone that has experience with this.
Awesome. Hey, this is very useful information. We're very thankful to get this out to students. Actually have some colleagues in other districts that said, hey, this sounds like a really cool project, so if it's okay, I'll happily share this kind of stuff with them as well.
Sure. Feel free.
The more people that hear this kind of thing from direct sources like you guys are fantastic. Would you mind? It was pre-camera recording. Would you mind doing a little bit of your cafeteria area?
Oh, you want to see the space? All right.
Kids would get a kick out of it.
I'll try not to do it too fast. So there's K-Nate. So there's other people here, but so I'm on the 5th floor. I'm just gonna circle you around.
Nice big screen.
This wide open area, believe it or not, is a lot of times we do yoga there. We have combat boot camp starting up in about a half hour. It's a big all hands area. We've got some bleachers in the corner, sort of surrounded by TV screens.
Nice.
That we do a bunch of work at. So this is the kitchen that I'm sitting at. Work area back there and desks and things like that. And then I'm in the 5th floor, and we also have the 6th floor. So looking up from here, there's meeting rooms and then obviously more space above. There we go.
Awesome. Well, I think
Extra labs.
I say sometimes they're more interested in those kind of things, and it's a pretty impressive space you guys have there. So thank you guys so much for your time, and we look forward to maybe inviting you to our advisory in the fall and
let me know.
Some collaboration.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you a little more. See you later.
Thanks very much, sir. Bye.